All right, so IRS exams don't happen terribly often, but when they do, they will change your life. Okay? I've had IRS exams take a day and a half. We had one back in Pennsylvania back in the spring. The agent showed up. He came back the next day, was gone by lunchtime. 2 weeks later, we got a no change letter. That was not a day and a half worth of work, though. That wasn't even the 6 weeks we spent preparing for that exam. That was all the years ahead of time when the organization was very careful to get their house in order, so when the IRS did come calling, there was nothing to see. On the other hand, my longest IRS examination took about 18 months. And even though there was a no change letter at the end, it was enormously burdensome in terms of expense, in terms of time, in terms of energy, in terms of morale. That organization was very unhappy for those entire 18 months. Now, whatever prompts an IRS examination, they tend to follow predictable patterns. Whatever they look at, they tend to look at the same types of things on all the examinations they conduct. And I've never been on an IRS examination where they didn't at least look at executive compensation. Okay? What they're looking for is executive compensation that appears to be much larger than similar organizations, that's not set by independent persons, hours that don't justify that compensation. When we see people working 32 hours a week or less and making $500,000, that does tend to raise their eyebrows a little bit. What we really want to encourage organizations to do is have a compensation policy and to make sure that these transactions are done at arm's length with a good, strong paper trail. Another area that they will focus on in any IRS examination is employee classification. Now, it used to be they were very interested in employers who were treating people as independent contractors instead of employees. There's reasons employers like to do that, with the payroll taxes and the withholding, and the record-keeping burden is a lot lower if you can classify someone as an independent contractor instead of as an employee. And so they had 20 different factors they'd look at, to try to determine, well, is this person properly classified? And in general, we kind of know the difference. What I've noticed on my last few exams, they're not arguing so much on the classification anymore. One of the things they'll ask in the first information document request, they'll say, give us all your W-2s and all your 1099s for the year we're examining. And then they kind of put those to the side, and they're going to go through your general journal looking for transactions with vendors for which there is no 1099. In fact, on one of these, the examining agent came up with over 100 payments to vendors that didn't have a 1099. Now, that was a time-consuming thing to respond to, because then you got to go through and say, well, actually, this one's a corporation, and this one is a foreign organization, and this one was below $600, and okay, this one we missed. And it was extremely time-consuming, because you'd be surprised, it's not so easy to find out some of these vendors, whether they're a corporation or an LLC or an S-corp or a partnership. It's not immediately apparent with some of them. Now, the real risk here is if you fail to issue a 1099, does anybody know what the penalty is for failure to give a vendor a 1099 if you were supposed to? It's only $100. Actually, it's $200. There's $100 for failing to file a copy with the IRS, and there's $100 for failing to give it to that vendor. So $200 penalty. That's not too bad. The real issue here is if you were supposed to issue a 1099 and you didn't, and you can't otherwise prove that that vendor included that payment in their taxable income, then you, the payer, is responsible for backup withholding, which is 28%. So if you paid that vendor $10,000 and didn't issue a 1099 when you should have, you could potentially have an IRS examining agent asking for $2,800. Now, you multiply that several times over several years, and it can get very expensive. Now, your best way to protect yourself from this is whenever you make a payment to a vendor, get a W-9. Okay? And a lot of them will complain, oh, we're a corporation. You know what? It's just our policy. We gave you this a couple years ago. You know what? We're just updating our records. Get a W-9 from those vendors. Because then, even if you don't issue a 1099 when you should have, they can only hit you with the $200 penalty. They cannot hit you with the backup withholding, the 28% backup withholding, if you have a W-9. Okay, one of the questions I get asked most frequently is to draw the distinction between an advertisement and a sponsorship acknowledgement. We know the difference between a gift and a payment, right? We have a sense that sometimes people are giving us money, and other times they're giving us money with strings attached because they want us to do a few things in return for them. So what you need to be mindful of is when a corporate donor, I say corporate, it's usually a corporation, makes a donation and they want things in return. They have a contract they want you to sign that obliges you to do things. And this can create issues between sponsorship, advertisement, and actually other forms of revenue, some of which may or may not be taxable. So in conclusion, what I want to say is that your chances of getting an IRS examination, all things being equal, are probably about 2 or 3% in any given year, okay? But if it happens, it's not just the time and resources, it's the public perception that goes with it. Okay? Your employees will be aware that this is going on. It can be a huge drain of morale. It can leak out to other organizations that this is happening. There's always a question about what triggers these things, and quite honestly, sometimes nothing triggers them. But what you want to do is get those people in and out as quickly as possible. So by thinking ahead, the time to prepare for an IRS exam is before you get the notification that they're coming. Do what you can now to insulate and inoculate your organization so that if that ever does happen, it'll be over quickly and simply.